As we speak, a 52-year-old American is checking their retirement account. They have been working for 28 years. They have been doing everything right. And their balance reads $88,400. That is the median. That is not the exception. That is the American middle, staring down the barrel of retirement, terrified. Now cross the Atlantic to Norway. A government account opened on behalf of every single Norwegian citizen, every nurse, every teacher, every fisherman, every grandparent, just earned $247 billion. In a single year. That number needs to sit with you for a moment. $247 billion in 12 months, for a country of 5.5 million people. So here is the question that is going to keep you watching this entire video. What exactly do the Norwegians know about money that the American financial system has actively hidden from you? Because by the time we get to the final chapter of this video, you will understand the one structural truth about the Norway oil fund versus your 401k that the retirement industry does not want you to work out on your own. Stay with me because the math on this is staggering. The numbers that should not be possible. Let us get specific, because vague outrage is easy and data is powerful. Norway's government pension fund Global, commonly known as the oil fund, posted a return of 16.4% in 2025. Its total value at the close of 2025 was nearly $2.3 trillion. To put that in terms that are completely personal, that fund currently holds the equivalent of approximately $414,000 for every single Norwegian citizen alive today. Look at that number again. Let it burn into the screen. $414,000 per person. Babies included. Retirees included. The Norwegian who just graduated high school included. Every individual in that country, by birthright alone, sits behind a financial wall that has now officially crossed the $400,000 mark per head. Now compare that to where the average American stands. According to the most recent data, the median 401k balance in the United States sits at $88,400. That sounds almost comparable until you realize two critical things. First, that number is the median, which means half of all Americans with a 401k have even less than that. Second, and this is the part that genuinely changes the conversation, 41% of Americans have zero retirement savings. Not a little. It is zero. Nothing in the account. Nothing set aside. And before anyone says that 41% sounds better than it used to be, yes, recent auto-enrollment provisions under the Secure 2.0 Act have nudged that number down slightly from where it was a year ago. But let us be honest about what that means. For out of every 10 American workers are walking toward retirement with no dedicated savings vehicle at all. The needle has moved slightly, and the structural emergency has not. So Norway's collective sovereign wealth fund holds more than $400,000 for every Norwegian, and 4 out of 10 Americans are building retirement security on hope and Social Security alone. That asymmetry is not just a policy gap. It is a generational crisis hiding in plain sight inside your financial app. How the oil fund actually works. Here is where most people stop the analysis. They say, well, Norway found oil, so of course they got rich. That explanation is both partially true and almost entirely misleading. And we are going to bust that myth right now because understanding why it is misleading is the actual lesson. Texas found oil too. Louisiana found oil too. Oklahoma, Alaska, North Dakota. The United States is one of the largest oil-producing nations on the planet. The difference is not what Norway found underground. The difference is what they decided to do with what they pulled out of the ground. When Norway began serious oil extraction in the North Sea in the 1970s and 1980s, Norwegian politicians made a decision that defies almost every instinct of short-term political thinking. They decided that oil revenue was not income. They classified it as the conversion of a finite natural resource into financial wealth. That distinction changed everything. Because instead of spending oil money on current budgets, on tax cuts, on popular government programs, on political wind cycles, they created a sovereign wealth fund in 1990 and began depositing the majority of oil revenue directly into it. The fund is invested entirely outside of Norway, primarily in global equities, bonds, and real estate across more than 70 countries. The Norwegian government then instituted what is called the fiscal spending rule, which allows the government to withdraw no more than 3% of the fund's value per year to support the national budget. That discipline means the fund is never cannibalized. It is never raided in a crisis. It is never traded for political convenience. It just compounds year after year, decade after decade, functioning like the world's most patient investor. In 2025 alone, the fund's returns generated the equivalent of 36,000 euros in new wealth for every Norwegian resident. That is not money they put in. That is money the fund earned on their behalf while they were sleeping, while they were taking their 4 weeks of legally mandated paid vacation, while their kids were attending university tuition-free. The machine was simply running. The hidden math inside your 401k. Now let us talk about what your 401k is actually doing, and more importantly, what it is costing you without your full awareness. Because the American retirement savings vehicle, the 401k, is not a broken idea. But the system surrounding it contains a set of structural disadvantages so deeply embedded into normal life that most Americans have simply stopped noticing them. Start with access. 42% of full-time working Americans have no access whatsoever to a workplace retirement plan. They are not choosing to skip the 401k. They are not making a bad financial decision. The option does not exist for them at their employer. Nearly half of the working population is structurally excluded from the primary retirement savings tool the country promotes. Then there are the fees. The average 401k plan carries administrative fees, fund management fees, and record-keeping fees that collectively drain between 0.5% and 1.5% of your balance per year. That may sound minor until you run the compound math over a full 35-year working life. A single percentage point in annual fees does not just cost you 1%. Over a 35-year window, that 1 percentage point in annual fees can reduce your final retirement balance by 25 to 30%. On a projected retirement fund of $400,000, you could be silently losing $100,000 or more, paid out in fees you probably never saw itemized on a single statement. Norway's oil fund, by contrast, operates at a management cost of approximately 0.05%. Their fund, managing nearly $2.3 trillion across more than 70 countries, costs Norwegian citizens essentially nothing to run, relative to its scale. At 0.05% versus the average American's 1% in 401k plan costs, the Norwegian government is running the world's largest investment fund at a 20th of the cost that most Americans pay for their personal retirement accounts. The Norwegian government negotiates institutional-grade management fees because the fund is so large it has pricing power that no individual American retirement saver could ever access alone. Here is a question worth leaving in the comments right now. Your 401k fees are typically buried in your plan documents, not on your dashboard. When did you last actually look yours up? Because if you have never searched for the expense ratio in your 401k fund options, you may be losing significant wealth to costs you have never consciously agreed to pay. What the gap is really about. Here's the core insight. Here is the thing that lands differently once you see it. The American retirement system is built on individual responsibility operating within a system of concentrated financial advantage. You are handed a 401k, given a contribution limit, offered a menu of mutual funds with embedded fees, and told to figure out the rest. Your retirement outcome is essentially a function of your income level, your employer's generosity, and your own financial literacy, plus the volatility of markets you cannot control. The Norwegian system is built on collective ownership of a shared national asset, managed by professional institutional investors, with its returns flowing into the public infrastructure that reduces the financial pressure on every individual in the country. Norwegians do not need a massive 401k because their healthcare is funded. Their children's education is funded. Their public pension is structurally sound. The oil fund is not replacing personal savings. It is building the floor beneath personal savings so that the floor never falls through. When Natixis investment managers published their 2025 Global Retirement Index, a study that measures retirement security across dozens of countries, Norway ranked number 1. The United States ranked 22nd. And before that number sounds like progress, let us be precise about what it means. The United States, the largest economy on Earth, the country that invented the 401k, ranks 22nd in the world in retirement security. Behind Iceland. Behind Luxembourg. Behind Ireland. The country climbed 3 spots this year largely on the strength of recent wage growth, not because the structural retirement gap narrowed in any meaningful way. That ranking is not about individual wealth or individual effort. It is a measurement of whether the system itself is designed to support a dignified retirement for ordinary people. And on that measurement, the United States scores outside the top 20 of the developed world. If that framing hits differently than what you expected today, consider subscribing to Nexora. We are not here to lecture about politics. We are here to map the math and the lived reality of different systems, so you can see the full picture that most financial media never puts on the table. We do this every week, and this community keeps getting sharper together. Busting the biggest myth. The most persistent misconception about the Norway oil fund comparison is the one that sounds like a reasonable objection but actually collapses under scrutiny. It goes like this. The United States is too big and too diverse for a sovereign wealth fund model to work. You cannot compare a country of 5.5 million to a country of 330 million. That objection sounds logical. It is not as strong as it appears. Here's why. The Alaska Permanent Fund exists. Right now. Inside the United States. Alaska discovered oil, followed Norway's lead in broad concept, and created a sovereign fund that has distributed annual dividends to every Alaskan resident since 1982. The confirmed 2025 dividend was $1,312 per Alaskan resident, deposited directly, no application required, no means test, no income threshold. Every man, woman, and child in Alaska received that check. It is not the scale of Norway, but it proves the model is not geographically or politically impossible on American soil. The proof of concept is already operating within United States borders and has been for more than 4 decades. More importantly, the too big argument ignores the fact that the United States government owns roughly 640 million acres of land, more than any private entity in the nation. Those lands hold natural resources, mineral rights, and energy potential that are currently leased to private companies at royalty rates set decades ago, never seriously restructured. The revenue model exists. The asset base exists. What has not existed is the political will to redirect those revenues into a compounding national wealth vehicle rather than the general operating budget. This is not a left or right argument. Alaska's permanent fund was signed into law by a Republican governor. Norway's oil fund was expanded under both center-left and center-right governments across multiple decades. The discipline of saving, investing, and protecting a national asset from short-term political spending is not an ideology. It is a strategy, and the data shows clearly which countries chose it and which countries did not. Here is the second comment question worth dropping your answer on. If the United States created a national sovereign wealth fund starting today, one that paid future dividends to every American citizen, would you trust the government to manage it responsibly? Or do you believe American political incentives would cannibalize the fund within a decade? That is not a rhetorical question. Drop your honest answer below, because that answer reveals something important about what you actually believe about American institutional capacity. The qualitative weight. Numbers are essential, but numbers do not wake you up at 3 in the morning. What wakes people up is the feeling behind the numbers. An American worker in their mid-50s who has tried to save responsibly carries a specific kind of chronic financial stress. They are calculating whether to max out the 401k this year or pay down the mortgage. They are running numbers on when they can afford to retire, quietly lowering the target age with each passing year. They are watching healthcare costs rise and understanding with a specific dread that a single serious illness before Medicare eligibility at 65 could absorb most of what they have accumulated. They are doing this mental accounting continuously, in the background of every financial decision, every single day. The Norwegian worker is not living a life free of stress. Norway has its own social tensions and economic pressures. But the retirement math is structurally different. The Norwegian pension replacement rate, the percentage of pre-retirement income that the pension system actually replaces, is significantly above the OECD average. Universal healthcare means a medical event does not become a retirement-ending financial event. Free university for children means the parents' retirement savings are not being depleted to fund tuition. What Norway has effectively done is remove the catastrophic downside risk from ordinary life. The floor is higher. The fall is shorter. And as a result, the psychological relationship that Norwegians have with money, work, and retirement carries less of that ambient dread that has become a kind of background noise in American financial life. The gap between Norway's oil fund performance and your 401k in 2026 is not just a gap in numbers. It is a gap in stress. It is a gap in sleep quality, in career flexibility, in the ability to take a job you love rather than a job that pays. It is a gap in what it means to age in a society that has decided at the structural level that financial security in retirement is a baseline right rather than an individual achievement. So here is the answer to the question we opened with. What do the Norwegians know about money that the American financial system has actively hidden from you? It is this: the most powerful investment vehicle in human history is not a hedge fund, not a venture capital firm, not a tech stock. It is disciplined collective ownership of a national asset, protected from political short-termism, and compounded across generations. Norway's government pension fund Global returned 16.4% in 2025, bringing its total value to nearly $2.3 trillion, roughly $414,000 for every Norwegian alive today. The fund earned more in a single year, per person, than the total median retirement savings of an American worker who spent 3.5 decades faithfully contributing to a 401k. The median American 401k balance stands at $88,400. 41% of Americans have nothing saved. The country that ranks 22nd in global retirement security is also the country where the financial services industry earns more in fund management fees, averaging around 1% annually, than Norway's entire $2.3 trillion fund costs to manage at 0.05%. The structural irony of that comparison should not be lost on anyone. This does not mean the 401k is worthless. It does not mean individual savings are irrelevant. It means the 401k, operating in isolation without the structural floor of universal healthcare, public pension security, and free education, is doing far too much heavy lifting for far too many Americans, and the data after 35 years of both systems running in parallel has now rendered a verdict that is impossible to argue away with anecdotes about personal responsibility. The comparison between Norway's oil fund and the American 401k system in 2026 is not really a comparison of investment vehicles. It is a comparison of philosophies. One says retirement security is a collective project. One says it is a personal responsibility. And after decades of compounding, the gap between these two systems is no longer closing. It is accelerating. If this kind of comparative analysis is the lens you want on your financial reality, subscribe to this channel. Every week on Nexora, we follow the friction between the American dream and the Nordic reality, not to idealize one or condemn the other, but to give you the data so you can decide what to actually believe. I will be in the comments for the first 2 hours after this video drops, answering your specific questions on the math. See you down there. And the question I want to leave you with today, for the comments section and for yourself, is the one that cuts right to the core of everything we covered. Would you be willing to pay a higher tax rate throughout your working life in exchange for never having to worry about retirement, healthcare costs, or student debt for your children? Yes or no, and tell me exactly why. Because that answer tells you more about your actual values than any political label ever could.